Most people watch The Incredibles and see a movie about superheroes. I see a 15-year financial collapse. Syndrome broke buildings, the legal system, the national budget, and probably the global economy. And somehow, nobody's ever actually added up what that cost. From his first night as Incrediboy to leveling downtown Metroville with a giant robot. I'm pricing out every explosion, every murdered superhero, every lawsuit, every secret government program from the time that he was Buddy Pine.
Through the nose to get it. How do you think I got rich? I invented weapons.
Treating it all like a real insurance claim. The running total starts at $0. Let's see how fast that changes. The very first bill comes from the Cape Bomb incident when Bomb Voyage attaches a bomb to Buddy's cape. It blows a massive hole right through the middle of an elevated rail bridge. In the real world, something like this is a construction nightmare, especially in a dense urban setting like Metroville. Since the city is loosely based on places like Chicago and New York, we have to look at their L-train systems to find a price. In the movie, we see that the explosion blew out a section between two support columns. So, let's say about a 100-foot section of the track was destroyed. You now have two jagged ends of a bridge hanging over a public street. First, the city has to pay for an emergency engineering assessment just to make sure the rest of the bridge won't fall on people's cars. This procedure alone requires specialized testing equipment and full forensic analysis costing roughly $500,000 to make sure the force of the blast didn't send micro cracks through the rest of the line. Then comes the logistics tax. In a downtown area, you can't just park a crane anywhere. You have to shut down city blocks, which can cost tens of thousands a day in permits and traffic management. Mobilizing a heavy lift crane into a narrow business district is a logistical feat that costs roughly $1.5 million for transport, setup, crews, and the premium you pay when permits and tight access are involved. When you look at modern rebuilds, like the CTA's red and purple modernization, the costs are terrifying. While the CTA gets a wholesale discount for building miles of track, Metroville is paying emergency retail for a one-off gap. Between the custom steel and the third rail power systems, a fair benchmark for this kind of surgical work is $130,000 per linear foot. That's $13 million just for the physical bridge. But the bridge is only half the story. The city of Metroville just lost its most vital artery. Even with a 24/7 war room construction schedule, a linear 100-foot replacement in a dense urban core takes at least 30 days to clear, fabricate, and install. And that would still be fast-tracking it. In a system like Chicago's Loop, which sees roughly 40,000 weekday riders, that's about 1.2 million lost trips at the simple back-of-the-napkin level. At an average fare of $2.50, the Transit Authority is out $3 million in straight cash. But in real life, a system usually doesn't just shut down completely. It reroutes what it can and patches the broken link with shuttles. So if we assume that reroutes save most trips and there's only about a 20% drop-off, the lost fare is closer to only $0.6 million. The real killer, however, is the economic impact. Between the cost of commuters' lost time and the massive gridlock caused by thousands of people switching to Ubers and buses, even a modest 9-minute average delay across those disrupted trips adds another $3.5 million to the ledger. When you add the engineering fees, the crane money, the physical bridge, and the economic paralysis of the city, the final bill for that one 10-second explosion reaches a staggering $19.1 million. It is an incredible amount of money for about 10 seconds of screen time, and the bill is just starting. We can't ignore the damage to the train itself. Even though Mr. Incredible stops the train from falling off the bridge, he doesn't save the city any money on repairs. This is a violent emergency event. A train gets forced into a brutal stop, and with the lead car hanging out over a destroyed section of the track. Metroville here is basically dealing with a derailment level event, even if the movie doesn't spell it out for us. And derailments are expensive because the transit agency has to treat every car like a safety problem until it's cleared. Let's start with the cars first. Modern L-style rail cars are million-dollar assets. Chicago's CTA 7000 series order was reported as $1.309 billion for up to 846 cars, which comes out to roughly $1.55 million per car. New York's newer R211 fleet is even pricier. Kawasaki cites $4.5 billion for 1,610 cars, or about $2.8 million per car. So let's just say that one car takes the worst of the damage and treat it like a rebuild or replace case. That's $1.55 million right there using CTA numbers. I'm going to be conservative here and say that 2 more cars take heavy undercarriage and brake damage from the shock and wheel impacts, so call that $2.40 million. Then add another $0.60 million for interior damage and cleanup, because passengers slamming into poles, seats, doors, and glass is a major possibility during violent stops. Direct car damage piece at $4.55 million, anchored to CTA and MTA railcar pricing. Next comes recovery. Just like the destroyed track, getting railcars back on track takes specialized contractors, heavy equipment, and controlled work zones, and incident reports treat equipment and track damage as real itemized costs after the fact. The NTSB's CSX Lynchburg derailment report is a clear example of how derailment damages get accounted for and separated into categories. So we'll use that same figure for re-railing and settle at $1.8 million. Then you fix what the event did to the track right as it came to a violent halt. Because as loads shift, rail and track structure near the impact zone take damage and have to be rebuilt and verified before passenger service touches it again. So the railbed and track impacts damages are priced at $60,000. Now we need to talk about the inspection. After a derailment level event, the cars don't go back out until wheels, axles, bearings, brakes, couplers, traction systems, and safety critical hardware are inspected, tested, and documented. FRA's investigation work makes it clear how deep that process goes. So, fleet-wide inspections plus the minor repairs that get discovered along the way goes in at $1.65 million. So the train damage comes out like this: $4.55 million for railcar damage, $1.80 million for re-railing and recovery, $60,000 for track and railbed impacts, $1.65 million for fleet-wide inspection plus minor repairs. That puts the train side of the incident at $8.6 million. So our running total stands at $27.16 million. After the train incident, the damage stops being physical. Now it's lawyers, hospitals, and settlement checks. And what sets it all into motion is the Oliver Sansweet lawsuit, after Mr. Incredible saves him from offing himself by jumping off the bank of Municeberg building. So let's talk about Mr. Sansweet's neck injury first. Real spinal injury cost numbers show how quickly serious spine-related trauma can climb into major lifetime costs, depending on severity. Putting all of that into one high-profile pain and suffering settlement, and the working number lands at about $7 million for the Sansweet case. Next are the train passengers. Now, we don't know the exact number of people that were on board, or the number of people that were injured, so we can't really estimate the cost of the medical bills in the lawsuits. But there is real-world precedent of similar incidents that suggests that rail disasters can easily land in 9 figures once you add medical, wage loss, future care claims, and the legal engine that comes with mass injury. So a number like $200 million for a Metroville Express passenger class action fits the scale of an incident that becomes a political turning point. Then comes the wave of dozens of lawsuits against the supers. Property damage, business interruption, trauma claims, harassment, insurers suing to recover payouts, and years of defense and settlement costs. Estimating this would be a nightmare, so I'll just double the settlement costs for the train incident and price this whole thing at $400 million. So this whole section with the lawsuits and all it sits at $607 million. And that takes our running total to $634.16 million. Because of the lawsuits, the government is then forced to build a whole system to make the supers disappear from public life. That's the Superhero Relocation Program. For a real-world cost anchor, witness protection is the closest public benchmark. A GAO report on the Federal Witness Security Program says over 300 witnesses are admitted annually, and the program cost about $28 million per year back in 1983. That's about $91 million per year today. Now translate that into what Metroville is doing. If a few hundred supers and their households are being managed long-term, you're basically paying witness protection money every year for 15 years. On that same scale, $1.5 billion as the admin plus identity relocation bucket should give us a good number for new documents, relocation logistics, housing placement friction, emergency support, and the constant monitoring that keeps the cover stories from collapsing. Then there's the agency itself. Even if most supers are earning paychecks like normal, the government still has to keep the whole program running in the background. Someone who relocates families, manages cover breaches, and keeps incidents from becoming public knowledge, we see Rick Dicker do that for Bob in the movie. For scale, the US FY 2025 budget includes $1.9 billion for the US Marshals Service, which is what a large nationwide enforcement and protection organization costs. Metroville's operation is smaller, but it's specialized and it's permanent, which makes $500 million over 15 years a solid working number for a lean, keep-it-buried bureau with staff, benefits, response capability, and tech upkeep. So that puts the whole cost of the superhero relocation program at a mammoth $3.365 billion, and our running total gets to almost $4 billion. But all of that is just the beginning. Now we arrive at the main timeline, and this is where Syndrome comes to the fore as a massive societal threat. Mr. Incredible barely escaped with his life and is trapped at No Man is an Island. And that's when he discovers Operation Kronos, Syndrome's grand scheme of luring supers in one by one, feeding them to Omnidroid versions, and using the fight data to build the next one, over and over for years. Now, you can't really put a price tag on someone's life, but for a rough ballpark figure, I'll go with the value of a statistical life figure of $13.6 million that is used by the US Department of Health and Human Services. Meaning that across a whole population, people are willing to pay that much in total for small safety improvements that add up to saving one expected life. But supers are not your average victims. They are rare elite soldiers with superhuman abilities, so the loss gets priced higher by adding a capability premium. The estimated cost of training in the US Air Force has been estimated at about $5.6 million for an F-16 pilot, up to $10.9 million for an F-22 pilot. Split the difference and add $8 million on top of the baseline VSL, and the working cost becomes $21.6 million per super. At a working count of 25 supers killed, that puts the loss of life from Operation Kronos at about $540 million. But we've yet to talk about the place that made Operation Kronos possible. No Man is an Island. This place is a full weapons testing base with security, with R&D labs, and launch capability. For a real-world price check, the NSA's Utah data center is reported to be an insane $1.5 billion facility. Syndrome has a full island to his name, and it clearly goes way beyond a single secure building. So I'm putting No Manison's base build at least $3 billion. Now we come to the first big on-screen loss on the island, and that is the Omnidroid V8 fight. The droid ends up destroying itself when Bob gets inside and forces it to hit itself. To get a sense of scale, a modern tank like the M1A2 SEPVE Abrams has an export cost figure listed at $24 million. The Omnidroid is a custom weapons prototype with insanely advanced AI built to kill supers. So I'm pricing Omnidroid the V8 at $250 million. So now our running total is at $7.79 billion. Next up, we have Helen, aka Elastigirl, flying a private jet she got from Snug Porter to rescue her husband from No Manison.
So you do know these people.
Dash and Violet sneak on board, and once they're all within the range of the island, Syndrome shoots it down with short-range missiles. Now, this jet looks like it's a high-end private jet. A common benchmark is the Gulfstream G650ER, with a list price of $70.5 million. The missiles matter too. Syndrome fires 3 heat-seeking missiles. Let's say they were something like the AIM-96 Sidewinder, which has a unit cost of about $400,000. That's about plus $1.2 million. So the shoot-down lands around $71.2 million. They all survive and the Parr family eventually reunites.
How could I betray the perfect one?
They take out a bunch of Syndrome's Velocipods. Those are the guard hovercrafts used to go after the Parr kids on the island. We see at least 9 of them get destroyed. For a basic comparison, a light utility helicopter like a Bell 206L4 shows listings around $1.675 million. These Velocipods are armed and custom built, so I'm pricing them at $5 million each. So 9 of them makes it $45 million. So before the movie even gets back to Metroville for the final battle, our running total is already an insane $7.9 billion. And then the story shifts from the island to a national level emergency in the city, because the final version of the Omnidroids, Omnidroid version 10, gets shipped out and is on its way to Metroville. As soon as the droid comes out of its pod, it takes out a military tank with its laser cannons. So that's $24 million gone in a blink. Then we see an attack helicopter crashing and burning, which we'll price at about $2 million, around the price of a Boeing AH-6. A fuel truck is then flung across the street by Syndrome himself. A new fuel truck in the real world sits in the six-figure range. A current listing for a new fuel truck shows pricing at around $245,510, so we'll use that as our value. And during all of this mayhem, streetcars also get smashed, tossed, crushed, and caught in chain reaction wrecks all over the fight. Counting exact vehicles is impossible, but it's fair to say around a dozen or 2 dozen get totaled during the full sequence. I'm gonna split that and call it 18 vehicles. Kelley Blue Book reports that the average new car buyer paid $50,326 in December. Multiply that by 18 and you get about $910,000 in regular vehicles written off. We also see the Parr family land in Metroville on what seems to be a surveillance sort of RV that they stole from Nomanison, that is then crushed by the Omnidroid. I'll put a price tag of about $50,000 for that. Add in the fuel truck and all the vehicular damages comes out to about $27,205,510. Now, we need to talk about the building damage. We see 2 very clear moments on screen. The first is when Mr. Incredible is thrown through the glass of an office building by the droid. And the second is when the droid flies into a building. The building stays standing. That doesn't mean the repair bill is small. Glass, facade panels, interior walls, wiring, inspections, and structural checks can turn one ugly hit into a full rebuild zone. A moderate, medium quality office fit out costs about $202 to $574 per square foot. Now, using that as a guide, I'm treating this as a combined 50,000 square feet of heavily damaged space at a simple $400 per square foot repair level. That lands at about $20 million in building repairs. But the expensive part of a downtown disaster isn't just the on-screen destruction. It's street-level damage and everything under the street. The Omnidroid is slamming into roads, skidding, landing hard, and ripping across intersections. In the real world, one urban lane mile of major road work can run close to $10 million. You don't need the whole city to be ripped up for that to become serious money. A few critical blocks rebuilt so emergency vehicles can move again, plus traffic control and restripping, and the number climbs fast. Now, go under the asphalt, because that's where the city starts crying in spreadsheets. Water mains alone can be priced in the hundreds per foot. An AWWA case study straight up uses about $225 per foot as the installed cost for a new main. And for conduit and interduct, Grand Rapids duct system rate study shows a net linear cost around $87.33 per foot for a 4-inch duct with interduct, engineering included. Electric is the monster cost. Underground duct bank in urban areas cost roughly $46 million to $51 million per mile. If Metroville has to replace even 5 miles of that kind of heavy underground electric duct bank in the damage zone, that's about $250 million by itself. Layer in water main work, telecom duct, gas and sewer repairs, emergency traffic control, engineering, retesting, and paving the whole thing back over, and a working subtotal like $500 million for street and subterranean rebuild should be a good figure to work with for this estimate. Then comes cleanup. All that glass, concrete, twisted metal, and busted street has got to get hauled out. Debris removal is often priced by the cubic yard, and one FEMA appeal uses $15 per cubic yard as a reasonable cost. If the fight leaves something like 50,000 cubic yards of debris once you include street chunks, building facade, and cleanup staging, that's about $750,000 just to load and haul. And we can't forget the economic hit from all of this. Business interruption is a real disaster cost because each extra day of downtime compounds losses. For reference, Chicago's metro GDP is about $919 billion per year, which is about $3.5 billion per workday if you spread it across approximately 260 workdays. If Metroville's downtown disruption hits about 1% of daily output, that's $35 million per day. If the city loses 10 business days, that's almost $350 million at risk. Finally, the Metroville fight ends with the Omnidroid version 10 getting punched out, and the giant robot is completely destroyed. We priced the V8 at $250 million, and the V10 is an improvised version of that in every way. So I'm pricing the total loss of Omnidroid version 10 at least $600 million. That puts the big Metroville point at a grand total of $1.47 billion, and our running total gets to almost $9.4 billion. But we're still not at the end. The Parr family is then on their way home and find Syndrome inside their home with Jack Jack. He takes off with the baby before Jack Jack unleashes his abilities, forcing Syndrome to let go of him midair and try to flee on his Manta jet. And that's when Bob throws his supercar at the jet, blowing it up with Syndrome on board. So first, let's talk about the Manta jet, which is a high-tech VTOL aircraft. Looking at the prices of VTOL aircrafts like the Lockheed Martin F-35, a price tag of about $100 million looks like a pretty good ballpark number. I'm adding another $5 million for the fire response, debris cleanup, and the localized damage claims from a flaming aircraft coming down on a residential block. That keeps the Manta jet total loss at $105 million. Next is Bob's car, the Incredibile. For scale, a Bugatti Chiron is priced at $2.99 million, and one-off hypercars can sell for about $12.5 million. The Incredibile is a one-of-one supercar with state-of-the-art engineering, and it gets used like a missile. So a figure of about $7 million should cover the car losses plus the disposal mess that comes with it. And finally, the house. The Parr residence is destroyed when the ruined jet crashes onto it. New home construction is commonly described at around $200 to $280 per square foot for mid-range homes, with custom builds pushing higher. A rebuild with demolition, permits, inspections, utilities, furniture, and everything else should land somewhere at about $800,000 at least. And that's basically where the movie ends. Syndrome is gone, and the supers are once again able to return to public life. So our running total comes out to be about $9.51 billion. But we're still not done.
We're done when I say we're done.
Let's rewind for a second, because there's one huge part of this bill the movie doesn't show. It's how Syndrome got rich enough to build No Manison and do all of this in the first place. Syndrome didn't fund all of this with a lemonade stand. He says it himself. He got rich by building weapons and selling them, and that's the biggest contributor to Syndrome's damages ledger. Now, I'm not saying his weapons caused every war on Earth. That's not the point. The point is that when futuristic high-end weapons like Syndrome spread, they make violence easier to scale, and that shows up as real economic loss over time. So here's the simple math for all of this. The Institute for Economics and Peace tracks the global economic impact of armed conflict. For 2024, they put that cost at $900 billion. And they also show what's inside of it. About 51% is GDP losses, about 39% is refugees and internally displaced people, and the remaining 10% is conflict deaths, small arms, and terrorism. Now, we need a real-world size check for a top weapons seller. SIPRI reports that in 2024, the top 100 arms-producing and military services companies made about $679 billion in arms revenues. And Lockheed Martin, the biggest one, made about $64.7 billion. That's roughly 10% of the top 100 total. But we still need one more filter, because even real-world arms sales don't all turn into active conflict damage. Some of it sits in stockpiles, some of it is deterrence, some of it never gets used. So instead of assuming his full 10% size shows up inside the armed conflict damage pool, we apply a conservative conflict exposure factor. I'm gonna use 25%, meaning only about a quarter of a top seller's footprint is treated as showing up in real conflict outcomes that create GDP loss and displacement. So the share we actually apply to the $900 billion pool is 2.5%, which comes out to about $22.5 billion per year. Now, we need to decide how long Syndrome has been at that level. The movie jumps 15 years into the future after Incrediboy's night out with Mr. Incredible, but he doesn't become a top-tier weapons dealer the very next day. So, to keep it conservative, assume he's been in his peak phase for the last 5 years. But conflict damage doesn't stop the day Syndrome stops supplying. The biggest pieces of the IEP pool are GDP loss and displacement, which are the exact kinds of costs that keep hitting year after year. So we're adding 5 peak years plus at least another 5 years of lingering impact losses, which gives a 10-year damage window. So that's $225 billion in conflict-sized impact tied to Syndrome's weapons footprint across that peak plus overhang period. Now, let's split that into direct versus knock-on costs. Based on the IEP figures, I'm going to treat 10% as a direct conflict harm and 90% as recovery and secondary losses. That makes about $22.5 billion in direct harm and about $202.5 billion in recovery and lock-on. Lastly, we need to account for famine, disease, war orphans, medical needs, and other forms of long-run scarring on a population. Some of this is already inside GDP loss and displacement, but it doesn't all price cleanly. So we added a small surcharge of 10% on top of the recovery losses. 10% of $22.5 billion is about $20.25 billion. So, the weapon spillover comes out to roughly about $245.25 billion. And that takes our final total to a whopping $254.76 billion. So, could Syndrome have been stopped? Yeah, probably. And the annoying part is it might have started with something small. Buddy was a kid who wanted to help the supers, but Mr. Incredible shut him down hard. If he had handled that moment better, if he or some other super had checked in on him, given him a safe way to be part of it, there's a version of this story where he probably grows into a brilliant inventor on the good side instead of a guy building killer robots in secret. But none of that makes what he did okay. Being rejected explains why he's bitter. It doesn't excuse what he chose to do with it. So let me know your thoughts. If you were in Metroville, who stops Buddy Pine before he becomes Syndrome? And how?